25-year-old Wil Hendrick was a pretty typical guy. He was a college student in Moscow, Idaho. He had a good job, had a long-term partner, and was in the middle of remodeling his kitchen when he did another very typical mid-20s thing. He went to a friend's house party. Wil drank too much, engaged in a little bit of friend drama, and then he vanished. His remains were found nearly 4 years later in a rural area outside of town. 26 years after the fact, Wil's case remains open and unsolved.
Hello, and welcome to Box in the Basement podcast. I'm your host, Arlene.
And I'm Leah.
In the last 50 years, the U.S. has had nearly 1 million homicides, and since then, over 250,000 cases sit in a box in a basement where all hopes for justice go to die. In 1996, someone shot my uncle Leon Laurelis, changing my life forever and leaving a devastating hole in my heart, and his case remains unsolved. Join me and my wife Leah as we shed light on these forgotten victims, their life, the loved ones they left behind, the evidence, and the theories of who committed these crimes, leaving communities in fear and leaving families without answers. Support our effort to change the justice system through the Homicide Families Victims' Rights Act, as we hope to make a difference with our audience as we remember the victims and demand justice. In 1996, my world was shattered when my uncle Leon Laurelis was shot execution-style in a small town in Texas. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, and the pain of that injustice continues to haunt me, my family, and Leon's friends and coworkers. Here at Box in the Basement, we want to shed light on the overwhelming number of unsolved murders and disappearances here in Texas and beyond. We want to bring awareness to the lesser-known cases that got little to no attention in hopes that someone listening will come forward with any information. Ultimately, we want to get justice for Leon and for all the victims whose cases are sitting, collecting dust in a box in a basement. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement podcast and Justice for Leon Laurelis. And now you can also find us on YouTube.
1999 saw the impeachment of U.S. President Bill Clinton. East Timor overwhelmingly voted for independence from Indonesia. The mass shooting at Columbine High School resulted in 16 deaths. An earthquake in Turkey killed over 17,000 people, and the Y2K scare had much of the world on edge. The Denver Broncos beat the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl. The Dallas Stars defeated the Buffalo Sabres for the Stanley Cup. The San Antonio Spurs beat the New York Knicks in the NBA Finals, and the New York Yankees beat the Boston Red Sox in the World Series. I'm Your Angel by disgraced R. Kelly and Celine Dion topped the Billboard Hot 100. I completely forgot about that collaboration until just now. And Terry Clark had the #1 country song that week with You're Easy on the Eyes. Tom Wolfe's A Man and Fool was on top of the New York Times bestseller list for fiction, and Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation topped the charts for nonfiction. Moscow, Idaho is in the north-central part of the state, so up in the Panhandle. It's literally on the border of Washington state, and it's about an hour and a half southeast of Spokane, Washington, and about an hour and a half southwest of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Before white settlers entered the area, the region belonged to the Nez Perce, Palouse, and Coeur d'Alene people. Miners and farmers moved into the area after the American Civil War and christened the town Paradise Valley. But for some reason, nobody really knows why, the town's name changed to Moscow in 1875. The people of Moscow and other towns in the Panhandle region initially wanted to either be a part of Washington when it became a state, or they wanted to be an entirely separate state from the southern part of Idaho. The geographical differences made transportation and communication difficult at the time. The region would obviously later become part of the state of Idaho after all, but a compromise was struck, and Moscow became the home of the University of Idaho in 1889. Today, the town has a population of just over 26,000 people, and in 1999, when this crime occurred, the population would have been right around 21,000. The University of Idaho is the largest employer in the city. William Ray Hendrick, better known as Will to his friends and family, was born on Christmas Eve in 1973 in Lewiston, Idaho, to Keith and Leslie Hendrick. He was one of 4 Hendrick kids, as he had 3 sisters. He was an enrolled member of the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho and regularly participated in war dances in his youth. He graduated from Lewiston High School in 1992, then did a short stint in the Navy before leaning into his dream of professional acting. He was an extra in the movie Dante's Peak with Pierce Brosnan, and he enrolled in and got a job doing janitorial work at the University of Idaho in Moscow, which is about a 40-minute drive from his hometown. Will was a member of the local civic theaters in both Moscow and Lewiston. He loved to sing and dance, and he loved hunting with his family. At the time of his disappearance, Will was in a long-term relationship with a man named Jerry Schutz, and the couple lived together in a house off campus. In January of 1999, Will and Jerry were in the process of remodeling their kitchen, and Will decided he needed to blow off some steam. A friend of the couple named Katie Payne invited them to a party at her apartment, but Jerry begged off. He was tired and he wanted to get a good night's sleep. Who wants to be hungover when they're installing kitchen cabinets? That sounds awful. I don't blame him. Anyway, Will was feeling a little more social, so at around midnight he kissed Jerry goodnight and said he'd be home in a couple of hours. Will arrived at Katie's apartment complex, which was about a mile from his own home, and saw 2 parties happening. The one at Katie's place on the 2nd floor that mostly consisted of Katie's friends from the university, and a party on the 3rd floor with mostly former high school athletes from the area. Another of Will and Katie's friends at the 2nd floor party was named Karen, and she was upset because she was fighting with her boyfriend who was attending the party on the 3rd floor. Will's friends and family describe him as a guy who would help anyone, give them the shirt off his back, or in this case, step in to help with some personal drama. Katie didn't want to get involved, but Will went into protector mode, exacerbated by alcohol consumption, and he checked in on Karen throughout the night. At just before 2:30 a.m., Karen left for home, and Will stayed behind at the apartment complex. He was standing outside when Katie went into her apartment to call Karen to make sure she got home safely, and when she returned, Will was nowhere to be seen. Will was drunk, so she assumed he hadn't gone far. His car was still parked nearby, so she figured he went upstairs to confront Karen's boyfriend again. Apparently, he got a little spicy when he was drinking, and he wasn't afraid to fight. The next morning, there was no sign of Will. His car was gone, and Katie assumed he went home. When Will's partner Jerry called at around 11 a.m. asking Katie to send Will home because he wanted to get started on the kitchen cabinets, his circle started to get concerned. Clearly, he hadn't gone home. But as we've discussed in other cases, this case involves a grown adult. So while his friends and family were mildly confused, they weren't in full-blown panic mode yet. This might seem a little weird to our younger listeners, but this was 1999. We weren't all connected 24/7 and in each other's business like we are now. I used to go days without speaking to people when I was in college. So this party happened on a Friday night into early Saturday morning, and then nobody heard from or saw Will on Sunday all day. By Monday morning, Will's family decided enough was enough, and they started to search around town for him. Jerry found Will's car, a brown 1984 Pontiac, in a hotel parking lot near a busy intersection about half a mile from Katie's apartment complex. The car was unlocked. Will's personal effects, including his art portfolio and work keys, were inside. One thing Jerry noticed that was strange was that the driver's seat was pushed all the way back. I don't know his exact height, but several sources say Will was fairly tall, but he wasn't tall enough to necessitate pushing the seat all the way back in his car. And in any case, it was a significant enough change from normal for his boyfriend to notice. Two of the windows in the car were also rolled part of the way down, which is odd since it was January in Idaho. It would have been really cold. There was also a soda can in one of the cup holders, which police didn't find odd, but all of Will's friends knew that was completely out of the ordinary. Will smoked and dipped, so he always had two cups in his car, one for cigarette butts and the other for spit. There was never an actual drink in the car. The family contacted the police and filed a missing persons report, but it doesn't appear that law enforcement took the case all that seriously at first. Investigators claim that this was a quote-unquote tricky case because it involved both local and county law enforcement, and that led to a lot of headbutting and miscommunication. But I can't help but wonder if there was more to it than that. Maybe I'm too cynical for my own good. I don't know. Police didn't impound Will's car until several days after it was found, and apparently they didn't find anything all that suspicious. No fingerprints, blood, hair, nothing like that. None of the investigators seemed too concerned that his work keys and art portfolio were left behind, or that there was a ton of mud in the wheel wells and on the tires of the car, which was entirely out of the ordinary for Will. For one thing, this was a 15-year-old sedan, not a Land Cruiser or a Jeep, and Will was not one to drive off the pavement. This also piqued Jerry's interest, and it made him certain that Will had been the victim of foul play. Investigators did conduct numerous interviews and polygraphs and followed up on some leads, but nothing of note surfaced. Witnesses at the apartment complex the night of the parties stated that Will was a little pushy and belligerent, which wasn't out of the ordinary. But one of friend Katie's neighbors said that Will walked into his apartment and started popping off just randomly. But when this neighbor asked him to leave, Will just turned around and left without incident. So, like, he was mouthy, but he wasn't necessarily out looking for a real fight. Other witnesses said that they heard a car leave the apartment complex sometime after 2:30 a.m., like tires screeching and speeding away. At first, both Will's inner circle and law enforcement felt like this could have been a voluntary disappearance. One of Will's friends told police that he'd been kind of overwhelmed and stressed out, and had commented that he just wanted to walk away from his life, or maybe just travel for a while around the country. Nobody else could corroborate these claims, though. As far as his partner, family, and friends were concerned, Will was pretty happy, and he was making plans for the future. He and Jerry had a nice life together. They'd been together for 5 years at that point, and they were remodeling their home. Will was set to graduate from the University of Idaho that spring, and he was supposed to audition for a play the same Saturday he never came home. Will also had a $6,000 check sitting at the university's financial aid office that he never picked up. He left all his personal belongings, including his car and his art portfolio, behind, though it's important to note that his wallet was never found. It never really made sense to Jerry or anyone else that Will would just walk away. Jerry also wondered if maybe Will had taken drugs and had wandered off, or maybe he was sitting in jail somewhere. Several of the people at the second floor party were known to dabble in the drug trade, so it wasn't too far-fetched. Someone had slipped Will some acid at a previous gathering, and he'd had a really bad trip, so Jerry was concerned that something like that might have happened again. But Will wasn't sitting in jail, he wasn't in a hospital room somewhere, and none of his other friends or coworkers had any idea where he could be. Friends and family tried to stay positive, at least at first. Police followed up on a few reported sightings. They conducted more interviews, and the polygraphs continued, but no trace of Will was ever found. On September 7th, 2002, A group of hunters out in the woods near Beauville, Idaho, some 40 miles from Moscow, saw a strange white object sticking out of the ground. The hunters quickly realized that the object was a human skull, so they called police. Dental records determined that the skull and jawbone investigators pulled from the ground belonged to Wil Hendrick, but no other bones or physical evidence were found in the subsequent 2-day search of the area. The medical examiner ruled that the cause of death was homicide, but to this day, no cause of death has ever been publicly released. The investigation ramped up significantly, and several persons of interest were identified, but the case quickly stalled. The FBI even came in and assisted with the investigation, and they theorized that whoever killed Wil left the area shortly thereafter, but had probably eventually returned because he had ties to the region. So let's jump straight into some theories and suspects, because there are a few of them, and some of them are pretty interesting. So obviously, because this was at first a missing persons case that involved an adult, investigators had to consider the possibility that Wil left on his own and maybe he met with trouble early on. Maybe he hitched a ride with the wrong person, something to that effect. We do have that one friend of Wil's that claims he was stressed out and wanted to walk away from his life, but again, nobody else could back that up. It just seemed entirely out of character for Wil to want to leave, especially given the fact that he was in his final semester of college, was in a stable, long-term relationship, and had goals and plans. In my opinion, Wil was killed either by someone he encountered at the apartment complex that night, or someone he had previous issues with, who sought him out and killed him. The first subject we'll discuss is someone that Jerry was wary about early on. Jerry was the manager at a van shuttle service, and he had an altercation with an employee not too terribly long before Wil disappeared. This employee came in from a shift and started mouthing off to Jerry. Jerry shut him down. This employee replied with a gay slur, and Jerry fired him on the spot. This man apparently lived near Wil and Jerry, and there is some indication or speculation that Wil may have interacted with him occasionally, though the sources I have on that are not especially tight. This former employee and possible acquaintance got a job as a truck driver, a long-haul truck driver, and he drove a refrigerated truck. He left town the same morning Wil went missing, which seemed a bit too coincidental at first. But it turned out this guy actually had a good alibi, and he left in his truck on a long-haul route to Florida, and then he just stayed in Florida. There was another suspect that investigators looked into, a hitchhiker that the aforementioned truck driver picked up in Texas. He was a shady character and a raging homophobe who had also been terminated from his job for using gay slurs. As we mentioned, Wil was a bit of a hothead, and he didn't always just let things go when people would call him names or get in his face. If he'd gotten into an altercation with this mystery hitchhiker or someone else who had a problem with him for his sexual orientation or for any other reason, it wouldn't be out of left field. One final suspect is a foster brother of one of Wil's relatives. Apparently, he bragged openly about killing Wil, but investigators were never able to make a solid connection to this person and Wil's disappearance. Last, we have another person of interest I want to discuss. It's a man named Benjamin Williams. He was a white supremacist who was convicted of murdering another gay couple in California. He lived in Moscow and attended the University of Idaho at the time of Wil's disappearance. He committed suicide in prison, however, so if there's a connection, we'll probably never know. A new sheriff was elected in Latah County in 2004, and he was absolutely appalled at the state of the investigation into Wil's death. He went back over the initial suspects and persons of interest, and even looked into allegations of corruption in the local police department. But he didn't really find any evidence of wrongdoing, just a less than stellar job at investigating. This new sheriff was hamstrung by his predecessor as well. Many of the files related to Wil's case were password protected, and he couldn't access them. And this apparently included files the new sheriff had written himself throughout the course of the initial investigation. This makes me wonder if the previous administration was covering for someone. Maybe they knew who killed Wil and they were stalling or covering it up. Unfortunately, by the time the new sheriff took office, there was no real evidence of any wrongdoing on the sheriff's department's part. It's just frustrating and seems very petty. Because this case is unsolved, we don't have access to all the files and information we'd like, but it's apparent that we've reached a brick wall. There are no publicly named suspects or persons of interest. The sheriff and chief of the local police department believe that Wil's killer was someone known to him, possibly someone he'd had an altercation with or an argument with previously, or possibly someone who just knew of him, knew who he was, maybe had a problem with him being gay, maybe had a problem with him being mouthy the way he was. We don't know. Until someone confesses or we find the rest of Wil's body, we won't know. The main problem here is obviously a lack of evidence. We have Wil's car that was found in a parking lot not far from the last place he was seen alive, but investigators didn't learn a whole lot from it. Probably because they didn't look too hard, but we can't really do anything about that now. The only remains that were found of Wil's were his skull and part of his jawbone. The rest of his body has never been found. The medical examiner was able to determine that Wil's manner of death was homicide, but like we said earlier, the cause of death has yet to be released publicly, if the ME was able to determine that at all. But that's where Wil Hendrick's case stands today. Unfortunately, Wil's father passed away in 2013 before he could get any answers or justice for his son. If you have any information regarding the disappearance and subsequent murder of Wil Hendrick, please contact the Moscow Police Department at 208-882-2677.
Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast creators, host, and guest. If you or someone you know is a victim of crime, support is available. Call 855-4-VICTIM to speak with someone who can help you understand your rights and options. Visit victimconnect.org to learn more. We are excited to announce that we are now a part of the Darkcast Network. Darkcast Network, the best in indie podcasts. Check out all the great shows at darkcastnetwork.com. If you think bringing unsolved cases is important, then please take a moment to rate and review our podcast. Also, please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement podcasts and Justice for Leon Laurelis. You can now also find us on YouTube. If you like what you hear, please do us a favor and subscribe. It would help so much, my lovelies. Also, please share this episode so we can bring awareness to these lesser-known cases so we can reach more people in hopes that someone who may know something will come forward. I'd also like to ask that you sign my petition for my Uncle Leon Laurelis' case to be reopened and reviewed with fresh eyes. And you can find our petition on change.org. This podcast has a bigger purpose than just providing information and entertainment. The Homicide Victims Families Rights Act is a bipartisan bill that was signed into law by Congress in 2021, and we want to see it put into action. This law establishes a systematic process for reviewing case files related to cold case murders. The focus is on providing a mechanism for the families and friends of murder victims to request a formal review of such cases. I also have a GoFundMe page to hire an attorney to help me get a copy of his autopsy that I have been denied for 27 years. You can find the GoFundMe by searching for Leon Laurelis. That's Laureles. But to get his body exhumed, to search for evidence that was not collected the first time around. Thank you for joining us. Be kind. Later, Gators.